Hello, everybody. I am quite familiar with this spot outside the Humanities Building. I've been coming here for twice as long as most of you have been alive. And I'm very, very honored to be joined today, or actually joining today, because he was much more the catalyst than I was, my colleague, James Skoufis, George Washington University class of 2008. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a crossroads in higher education, as we frequently are. Look around you. Look around at over $200 million worth of capital investment in this campus to improve this campus. Over the past 20 years, we've invested that much money, over $150 million of it, to make this campus twice what it was when it was originally built and expanded to its current configuration. We do owe a great debt to the people of the state of New York for their investment and their promise that we care about higher education in the 21st century and that we want to have the most modern facilities we possibly can. This campus is transforming right before your very eyes, but it means more than buildings. These buildings don't serve any purpose whatsoever if we do not have adequate faculty in our classrooms in these buildings, if we don't have adequate staff at our state university system across the state of New York, and if we don't have access for every person who is willing to put the hard work it takes in to get a degree, gaining access to these facilities. Your good work over these past 5 years has resulted in a 15% increase in the full-time faculty of the State University of New York at New Paltz. There are 15% more full-time faculty members today than there were 5 years ago. All credit goes to you for doing that. And here's why. Because 5 years ago, a commitment was made on the part of the state university system in agreement with the state legislature of New York State that if we gave them permission to raise your tuition, that they would invest it in the campuses. They did that. They kept their word. But that time has come and gone. Who didn't keep their word? The state of New York, as said by the chairman of the Higher Education Committee just yesterday, in keeping its commitment for maintenance of effort, did sort of a skim milk version of maintenance of effort. If a fund could be pulled into the state university budget and called maintenance of effort, it was. The result was that the dramatic tuition increase that you experienced did not produce the dramatic result that was intended. New York State must be held to keep its promise. There's only one way we can do that. And though my colleague James Skoufis has been a champion since he walked into the halls of the Capitol of free public tuition, no tuition in public colleges, what we must do as a first and important step is freeze tuition here and now, not let it increase automatically or any other way for this year or next year. Do you support that concept? And we must go back to the drawing board, back to the negotiating table, and before we give the State University of New York Board of Trustees, before we give the governor the unfettered authority to increase your tuition, we must extract from them a commitment that we will have a real maintenance of effort, that we will have a real continued investment in our SUNY system, and that we will continue to strive to make accessible higher education to all who desire it and all who are willing to put in the hard work to make it happen. That's what we have to do. We have to make sure that SUNY is not just the university of last resort, but that it is the finest education that people can receive. It is a great university. And we must continue to improve access to this great university, not just for the students who we let in, but for the whole of society, for the diversity of society. That's what makes our society work, when there is equal opportunity for all. You should be proud to be SUNY students. It is the greatest university in the United States of America. Some would say the greatest university in the world when you consider how many people are enrolled in our programs, how many people receive degrees, and how many of those people go on to become extremely, extremely important and productive members of society. That is a remarkable achievement. It is perhaps the finest achievement of the state of New York. So you should be proud to be part of the SUNY system. Are you proud to be part of the SUNY system? You should be proud to be students at SUNY New Paltz. Not only do you have some good-looking, very elderly alumni like me, but you also have a committed and dedicated staff. You should know, and you probably don't know, that the administration of this school approached us last week and the week before to seek a doubling of the space provided and the programs provided under the EOP program. That's leadership that we need all over the state of New York. That's leadership that SUNY New Paltz administration has been providing, and we need to verify that and validate that by making sure that we fully invest in our equal opportunity programs, by making sure that the admission criteria of this school is the quality of the individual, not the fatness of their wallet. And that's so important. We know that the greatest crisis facing the next generation of people in our country, perhaps the greatest crisis, is student debt. Increasing tuition, even if we couple it for a tuition assistance program enhancement for people at the very bottom of the economic spectrum, doesn't help most students in this school. It does help make that crisis even worse. We have to stop paying lip service to the issue of student debt and start doing something about it. Freezing tuition is an important step to doing so. There's a lot more to be done. You are very, very lucky. Even though he doesn't represent this college, he represents the community nearby, to have a champion in James Skoufis. James Skoufis, from the moment he walked in, stop that, this is his opponent, has control of this mic right now. From the moment he walked into the state capitol, from the moment he stood up for the very first time in the state legislature, his voice was a voice for the students of New York State. Now, maybe that's because it was a very recent experience for himself, having barely graduated from his graduate program before he assumed office. And I'm not kidding about that, the youngest member of the state legislature. But because he understands and he has verbalized the importance of higher education for all citizens. He understands how much society is improved if we improve educational opportunities for all. I have been proud of many of my colleagues and many of the people who have been in the state legislature before me, but I have never been more proud to serve than I have been with my friend, my colleague, and I want to ask you to join me in welcoming the future of the state of New York, James Skoufis.
He's too much. You know, I've made this an issue the past, now going on 4 years I've been in the Assembly, but this is someone who has fought for access to higher education long before I was even a thought in the State Assembly. This and so many other progressive issues. SUNY New Paltz is extremely fortunate to have a champion in Kevin Cahill. Give him another round of applause. So as he alluded to a couple of times, I'm not very far removed from where you are here. It wasn't too long ago that I left college with tens of thousands of dollars in student debt. And let me tell you what I believe government is there for. Government is there to ensure a decent and humane society. There is nothing decent or humane about burdening you and burdening your peers with more student debt. There is nothing decent or humane about sending more college graduates back to their parents' basements because they can't afford to go out and find a rental or their own home. There is nothing decent about that. But the past 5 years, we have seen these so-called rational tuition increases where there is nothing rational about them. Automatic tuition increases, there is no place for them, especially now at a time where we're talking about a surplus here in New York State. There are many people, our colleagues in the legislature, who are proponents of extending rational tuition another 5 years. It was put in the governor's budget just a couple of months ago. The SUNY chancellor is perhaps the biggest proponent of extending rational tuition. Your president here at SUNY New Paltz is a proponent of extending rational tuition, as his office reminded us just a couple of days ago leading up to this event. Let me tell you something about some of those people. The SUNY chancellor makes $500,000 a year, on top of $90,000 in a housing allowance. That must be a pretty nice house. It's easy for her to go out and say a couple of months ago at the State of SUNY address, as she gives every year, it's easy for her to go out and say, I think rational tuition and tuition increases is a good thing for students. It's easy for anyone making that kind of money to say that. She makes almost 3 times as much as the governor. And let me tell you, one of the arguments in favor of not just her, I don't want to pick on her specifically, but a lot of administrators here in the SUNY administration, they make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that our tuition pays for. And the argument in favor of that is, oh, well, we need well-qualified people for these jobs. The jobs are so important. Let me tell you, the job of governor is pretty important, too. He makes $179,000 a year. I can guarantee you, if the SUNY chancellor was making $179,000 a year, there would still be a long line of very qualified people looking to take that job. So that excuse, and that's partly why tuition has been increasing as well, that excuse is malarkey. So we are here. It just came out and was released yesterday, as was mentioned before. We and many of our colleagues have taken a strong stand in the Assembly and have said enough is enough. And yesterday it was released in our Assembly budget. We completely, fully, 100% reject extending rational tuition for any amount of years. And that's just the start. As Kevin mentioned, I have a bill I introduced 2 years ago called Tuition Free New York that actually makes SUNY and CUNY tuition free. That's the direction we ought to be moving in. The argument in favor of rational tuition is, well, at least the students can plan, at least the families can plan, they'll know what's coming. I resent the argument that tuition has to increase and thus we should be planning for it. Tuition does not have to increase, it ought to be decreasing. We ought to be making higher ed more affordable here in New York State. So I'm here, Kevin's here, with some of the strongest advocates. You have a tremendous group of representatives in New York Students Rising. We are honored to be standing here with them in this fight, but this fight is not over. The state Senate budget, I believe, gets released this weekend. And regardless of what they do, we have a final budget that's due April 1st. So we need to keep making sure that our voices are loud and unified and in the direction and demonstrating that we will not take 5 more years of increases. We will not take 1 more year of increase. We must stand firm. Let me tell you something. The Senate Higher Education Chairman 5 years ago is the same Senate Higher Education Chairman that exists now here today. He's from Long Island. And 5 years ago, he was a strong, strong supporter of rational tuition increases. In fact, he said his only regret was that this didn't happen 6 or 7 years ago. So these are the kind of people we are still dealing with. We have some very strong supporters of extending this irrational tuition plan. And we need to keep making sure that our voices are loud and heard and making sure that on April 1st, in that final budget, we reject rational tuition once and for all. Thank you. It's our privilege to be here, and let's keep fighting.